The marble conference table looked like it could swallow him whole. Daniel Reese sat at the very end of it, hands flat heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. Across from him, a row of polished executives stared like he was a stray dog that had wandered in off the street. At the head of the table, a judge-faced attorney cleared his throat and lifted a thick document. To be absolutely clear, the man said, voice echoing through the glass-walled room, Mr. Harold Bishop leaves controlling interest in Bishop Foundry and the attached charitable trust to Daniel Reese. The room broke. A woman in pearls gasped. A man in a tailored suit shot to his feet, chair scraping violently across the floor. "That's a security guard," he shouted, jabbing a finger toward Daniel. My grandfather was confused. "We're contesting this, right now." Two private security guys in dark suits moved closer, as if they expected the broke single dad at the end of the table to bolt with the building under his arm. Daniel didn't move. He just stared at the papers at the old man's signature at the bottom of the page, remembering a freezing bus stop, a busted thermos, and a hand that shook when it tried to zip a coat. He had no idea how a few quiet mornings and a cup of coffee had turned into this. But every angry face in that room told him one thing. Whatever Harold left him, these people would do anything to take it back. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from tonight, and hit that like and subscribe button if you believe courage still matters in this world. The truth is, none of this started in a boardroom or a lawyer's office. For Daniel Reese, it started in the dark. Every night at 10 p.m., he clocked in at the old Riverside Transit Center in Dayton, Ohio. Most people only saw the chipped paint and flickering lights. To Daniel, it was where he kept the lights on at home. He was 34, a night shift security guard, with a second-hand sedan, and a 7-year-old daughter who still slept with a stuffed giraffe. By the time the drunks staggered through and the last bus pulled out, Daniel had already walked the platforms twice, checked the doors, and texted his babysitter to make sure Emma had brushed her teeth. His life was measured in small things: punching in, punching out, stretching a grocery budget until it squealed. Before this, he'd been a firefighter. He still woke up sometimes thinking he heard the alarm tones, but a collapsed roof and a crushed knee had ended that career fast, and with it went the pay, the benefits, and the piece of himself that felt useful. Now he limped a little when the weather changed, and carried his pride like something fragile. Divorce papers sat in a drawer at home, along with medical bills and a child support order. His ex-wife never quite managed to follow through on. Daniel didn't drink. He didn't complain. He got Emma to school every morning, even if it meant running on 4 hours of sleep. He answered every question she asked, from "Why is the sky pink?" to "Why doesn't Mom come to my school plays?" And when she fell asleep, he sat at the kitchen table with a calculator and a knot in his chest, trying to make numbers that didn't like each other add up. What he had left, what nobody could take from him, was how he treated people. So when the winter turned mean and the wind came off the river like broken glass, Daniel noticed the old man at the end of Platform C. Same thick wool coat every night. Same crooked cap pulled low. Same stubborn way he tried to pick up his own grocery bag, even when his hands shook too much to grip the handle. Most people stepped around him. Drivers averted their eyes. Teenagers laughed as they cut past him to catch their buses. The first night, Daniel walked over the old man, was sitting on a cold metal bench, wrestling with a small thermos whose lid wouldn't budge. Daniel saw the way his fingers trembled, how his jaw tightened, as if he'd rather freeze than ask for help. "Evening, Sir," Daniel said quietly, breath steaming in the air. "You mind if I give that lid a try?" The old man hesitated, blue eyes sharp under bushy gray brows. Then he let out a worn sigh and handed it over. That right there was where everything began. Daniel didn't think much of that moment at Platform C. He twisted the thermos lid loose, handed it back, and gave the old man a nod. Nothing mystical, nothing cinematic, just a small act of decency at the edge of a freezing bus station. But over the next few nights, the old man showed up again. Always the same bench. Always the same stubborn struggle with little tasks his hands couldn't quite manage. And every time, without making a production out of it, Daniel stopped to help. A grocery bag lifted, a zipper tugged closed, a dropped glove retrieved before the wind carried it away. They barely spoke. The old man didn't smile. He didn't thank him. But he let Daniel help, and that alone felt like a kind of trust. A quiet one, the kind Daniel understood. Other people noticed him, though. Not the kindness. Just him. One night, near the end of Daniel's shift, Officer Rendell, a transit cop who treated his badge like a scepter, wandered across the platform. He was big in the belly, small in patience, and had a career-long habit of disrespecting anyone who made less than he did. "You," Rendell barked, pointing at Daniel as if calling a dog. "We've had complaints about you lingering around patrons." "What are you doing?" Daniel straightened his posture, hiding the ache in his knee. "Just assisting a regular rider, sir." Rendell snorted. "Assisting? Looks like loitering, or worse. You're not a social worker. You're paid to secure the premises. Quit playing savior and do your job." The old man on the bench stared down at his thermos, pretending he didn't hear. Daniel kept his voice level. "Yes, sir." Rendell stepped closer, breath sour with stale coffee. "Don't sir me like you're some Marine. I know your type injury pension denied wife left, now you're trying to fix the world with handouts. Just keep the area clear and stop making this station look like a charity ward." He walked off, heavy boots thudding angrily. A couple of teenagers nearby laughed like they'd just watched something funny. Daniel felt his face heat, not from shame, but from the effort of staying calm. He didn't look at the old man. He didn't want pity from him. He just resumed his patrol steps, slow heart, heavier than before. Later that night, when he returned to the bench, the old man extended the thermos without meeting Daniel's eyes. The lid was already off. The old man didn't say a word. But Daniel recognized the flicker of understanding, the kind born between people who've been talked down to one too many times. That week, everything else seemed to unravel at once. On Wednesday morning, Daniel received an email from the after-school program, tuition past due. Emma cannot continue attending unless payment is received by Friday. His stomach dropped. He'd been stretching every check to cover food, heat, and gas, but the math was starting to collapse around him. That afternoon, when he picked Emma up, she climbed into the back seat with her art folder clutched to her chest. "Daddy," she said softly. "Why'd Ms. Hawkins say I might not come next week?" Daniel gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Just a misunderstanding," he said, forcing a smile into his voice. "Grown-up stuff. I'll fix it." She accepted the answer the way a child accepts weather, trusting, hopeful, without understanding how storms work. When they got home, she laid her drawings out on the kitchen table. The top one showed a stick figure version of herself next to a taller figure labeled "My Dad the Hero." He swallowed hard. He hadn't felt like anyone's hero in a long time. Not when he had $74 in his checking account. Not when the fridge buzzed louder than it cooled. Not when the landlord left another note about timely payments. Every direction he looked, something was slipping through his hands. But the one thing he never let Emma see was fear. So he helped her with homework, read her a bedtime story, and cleaned the kitchen until the counters shined, because order, even the forced kind, kept the panic from spilling out. The mistreatment at the station only escalated. A group of late-shift bus drivers had taken to calling Daniel Rent-A-Cop Ricky, laughing every time he walked by. He ignored it. He had long ago learned that men with small authority often needed big jokes. But one night when a new supervisor named Barkley visited for an inspection, the jokes became ammunition. Barkley was tall, rigid, and wore an expression like the world owed him both gratitude and silence. He carried a clipboard like it was a weapon. "I've been reviewing reports," he said, as he joined Daniel on the platform. "Your productivity numbers are low, excessive time spent in non-essential tasks." Daniel blinked. Non-essential. Barkley pointed across the way, where the old man sat hunched over his bench hands in his lap. That's what you need to stop." Daniel inhaled slowly. "I was helping him. He struggles with Barkley cut him off. Not your concern. Your job is to secure the station, not babysit drifters. You're not a therapist. You're barely staff. Barely staff." Daniel felt the words like a shove. "I understand," he said evenly. But Barkley wasn't finished. "Look, I know guys like you. You get too attached, start bending rules, then think you're indispensable. You're not. This place has run fine for 100 years without your rescue missions. One more infraction, just one, and you're gone. Is that clear, Crystal?" Daniel nodded. When Barkley walked away, the platform felt colder than usual. Across the way, the old man lifted his gaze, observing him with quiet concern. Daniel forced a small smile and continued his patrol. But inside, something was cracking. Not loudly, not suddenly, just the slow, quiet split of a man pushed too far for too long. On Friday evening, Daniel stopped by the after-school program office on his way to drop Emma off for their movie night. He hoped desperately he could negotiate a payment plan. The receptionist didn't even look up as she said, "Balance overdue." "Without payment, Monday is her last day." Daniel explained, voice steady, though his hands shook. He talked about his schedule, about working nights, about trying his best. The receptionist finally glanced at him with an expression that wasn't unkind. It was worse than unkind. It was indifferent. "Well, rules are rules," she said lightly. "You'll have to figure something out." As they left, Emma glanced up at him. "Daddy, am I in trouble?" "No, sweetheart," he said, lifting her into the car seat. "Daddy just has to work a little harder, that's all." She nodded, trusting him completely. That trust felt heavy. Too heavy. At the station that night, the wind was brutal, sharp, punishing. Daniel pulled his hood up and limped through his rounds, knee aching. The old man was already on the bench, coat dusted with snow, staring at the ground. Daniel approached with caution. Not because of the old man, but because he knew any kindness tonight might cost him his job. "Cold evening," Daniel said softly. The old man didn't respond. He just shivered, hands tucked in sleeves that weren't warm enough. Daniel crouched beside him. "You okay, sir?" Still nothing. Just a long exhale that fogged the air. Daniel glanced over his shoulder, making sure Barkley wasn't lurking. Then slowly he reached into his own coat and pulled out a heat pack he kept for his bad knee. "Here," he whispered, slipping it toward the old man. "Hold this. It'll help." For the first time, the old man's eyes lifted. Blue. Sharp. Searching Daniel's face for something he couldn't name. He took the heat pack. He didn't speak, but he held it with both hands, and for a moment he wasn't trembling. Daniel straightened just as a voice boomed like a crack of thunder. "What exactly do you think you're doing, Barkley? Walking fast." Nostrils flared, clipboard tucked under his arm like a judge preparing a sentence. Daniel froze. "It's not what it looks like," he began. Barkley stepped between him and the old man. "Then explain it. Because it looks like you're violating protocol again. Interfering with riders, using unauthorized materials, Wasting time." The old man tried to hand the heat pack back, but Barclay swatted the gesture away as if shooing a child. Sir Barclay barked, "You cannot accept items from staff. Do you understand? This is not a shelter." The old man's face collapsed slightly, a flicker of humiliation tightening his jaw. Daniel felt something ignite in his chest. Anger. Not loud, not wild, just righteous and long overdue. But before he could speak, Barclay turned on him fully. "You're done here, Reese. I'll be filing the termination report tonight." The wind howled through the platform. The old man stared down at his shoes. Daniel felt the last piece of his stability tilt and break. "My shift isn't even over," Daniel managed. "It is now," Barclay snapped. "Clean out your locker. You don't work here anymore." He walked away without another word. The old man looked up at Daniel, eyes wide with something like regret or guilt. Daniel breathed slowly, trying to keep his world from spinning. Emma. The overdue tuition, the bills, the rent. Everything was crashing down at once. He swallowed hard, forcing a calm he didn't feel. "It's okay, sir," he said softly to the old man. "I'll be fine." But he wouldn't. Not even close. And as he walked off the platform toward the locker room, snow swirling around him like ash, he knew this moment, this breaking point, was the beginning of something he could not yet see. Something big was coming. He could feel it in the frozen air, humming like a storm waiting for its first strike. Snow hammered the roof of the transit center like the whole sky wanted in. Daniel stuffed the last of his things into a cardboard box, one spare uniform shirt, a half-used roll of tape, a cracked mug Emma had painted in second grade. The locker door creaked shut with a metallic groan that sounded too much like finality. His badge lay on the bench beside him. He stared at it for a long time. That badge wasn't just a job. It was the last thing he had left that made him feel useful. A gust of cold air barreled through the doorway as someone stepped inside. It was the old man from Platform C. He stood there, trembling, snow collecting in the folds of his coat, breath hard and uneven. His eyes darted around the locker room as if searching for something only he knew how to name. "How did you—" Daniel started, then stopped. The old man wasn't looking at him. He was looking past him to the door, listening. "Sir, are you all right?" Daniel asked gently. The old man took a small step closer and grabbed Daniel's arm with surprising strength. "They're here," he whispered. "Please, you have to come." Daniel frowned. "Who's here?" But the old man didn't answer. He simply tugged harder, desperate, terrified. Something deep inside Daniel, a firefighter's instinct dormant but never dead, snapped awake. He set the box down, grabbed the badge, and followed. They reached the platform, and the world tilted. A city bus had jackknifed across the icy ramp, smoke billowing from under the hood. A second bus sat at an angle behind it, its windshield cracked hazard lights blinking wildly. People were shouting. The smell of burning rubber filled the air. Screams echoed inside the first bus. A trapped driver. Passengers pounding on windows. Flames licking the bottom of the engine. Rendell, the transit cop, stood near the stairwell, yelling into his radio, but not approaching the wreck. "We need fire, we need EMS, I don't care. Just get me someone," he barked. "The doors won't open." Barclay paced in circles, holding his clipboard like it might protect him from the heat. "No one go near it," he shouted to a cluster of riders. "Stay back until emergency crews arrive. Liability will liability." Daniel snapped. He stepped past him. Barclay grabbed his sleeve. "You're not staff anymore. Stand down." But the old man, face pale and eyes blazing with urgency, pointed to the back of the bus. "There's a child in there," he rasped. Daniel froze. A child. His chest tightened. Emma's face, her drawings, her little voice asking, "Am I in trouble?" flashed in his mind. Without another thought, Daniel tore free of Barclay's grip. "Hey," Barclay shouted. "You go in there, that's on you. You're not covered." But Daniel was already running. Ice cracked under his boots as he sprinted toward the wreck. The heat from the engine felt like someone opening an oven door right beside him. The windshield was fogged from inside breath. Someone was alive in there. "Step back," Rendell yelled. The tank might blow. Daniel ignored him. He reached the front door and yanked on the handle. Nothing. The metal was warped. He pounded on the glass. Inside the driver, a woman in her 40s looked up, coughing and crying. Smoke poured around her legs. "Hold on," Daniel shouted. He backed up 10 feet, braced himself, and slammed his shoulder into the door. Pain shot down his arm. He did it again. On the third hit, the top hinge broke free. That was all he needed. He hooked his fingers under the edge of the frame and pulled with every ounce of strength he had left. Something in his knee tore. He felt it snap like a guitar string. He screamed, but the door gave way. Daniel stumbled inside, coughing as smoke wrapped around his face. "I've got you," he said to the driver, grabbing her under the arms. "Can you walk?" She nodded weakly. He half-carried, half-dragged her out, setting her gently on the asphalt. But the old man was right. There was another cry inside the wreck, thin, terrified, unmistakable. A child. Daniel didn't hesitate. He went back in. The smoke was thicker now. Hotter. The small cabin glowed orange from the engine fire beneath. Passengers huddled toward the rear door, panicking, pushing, shouting. The exits jammed, someone screamed. Daniel shoved past them and saw the little boy, maybe 7, trapped between the seats, his foot caught under a twisted metal brace. He was crying so hard he couldn't breathe. "Hey, Daniel," said gently, dropping to his knees. "Look at me. You're okay. I'm gonna get you out." The boy sobbed harder. "Where's your mom?" She's on the other bus." He choked. I ran to find her, and then... It's all right," Daniel said, voice low and steady. "Let's get you out first." He braced himself and pulled at the metal. It didn't move. The heat grew sharper behind him. Someone shouted that the flames were spreading. Daniel closed his eyes for a split second. He remembered another fire, another collapsing structure, another child he almost didn't reach, and the guilt that lived in him after that call gnawing at him every night. "Not again," he whispered. "Not this one." He planted his boot against the seat frame, grabbed the twisted brace with both hands, and pulled until he felt skin tear across his palms. The metal groaned, screamed, buckled. The boy's leg came free. Daniel scooped him up without thinking, shielding the child's face against his chest. "Hold on tight," he whispered. He ran. The aisle blurred. The exit seemed impossibly far. Heat clawed at his back. Something exploded under the engine, a sharp bang that threw sparks everywhere. He dove out of the bus and hit the ground hard, curling his body around the boy. When he finally opened his eyes, the crowd was staring. Rendell jaw slack. Barclay speechless. Passengers wide-eyed and trembling. And the old man standing at the edge of the platform, gripping the railing, tears cutting clean tracks down a face weathered by decades. Daniel let the boy sit up. A woman sprinted over from the second bus, the boy's mother, and collapsed around him, sobbing into his hair. "You saved my son," she cried to Daniel. "You saved him." Daniel nodded, but didn't speak. His throat was raw from smoke, and from something tighter, deeper. Rendell finally approached, looking stunned. "Reese," he began. That was..." But he didn't finish. Barkley stepped forward instead, face pale. "You could have caused a lawsuit," he blurted. The crowd turned on him instantly. Someone shouted, "Are you kidding me?" Another yelled, "He saved a child." Barkley shrank back. Daniel didn't say a word. He stood slowly, knee screaming in agony, palms bleeding, breath shaky. He felt weightless and heavy at the same time. Then he noticed the old man walking toward him. Each step was careful, deliberate, like every movement carried meaning. When he reached Daniel, he didn't speak right away. He looked at him with an expression that was equal parts sorrow and pride, like a man who knew the world had just shifted in a way nobody else understood. The old man lifted a trembling hand and laid it on Daniel's arm. "You did what others wouldn't," he said softly. "What others couldn't." Daniel swallowed hard. The old man's voice thickened. "You need to come with me tomorrow." Why, Daniel asked, confused. The old man's pale blue eyes shone with something fierce, something final. "Because your life," he whispered, "is about to change." Daniel stared at him, breath hitching in his chest. The crowd still buzzed behind them. The bus smoldered. The sirens wailed in the distance. But in that frozen moment, none of it mattered. Something enormous had cracked open. The child was safe. People had seen Daniel as something more than a night guard. And the old man, who had always seemed like a quiet shadow, was looking at him with a reverence Daniel did not understand. Not yet, but he would, because this moment, this fire, this rescue, this crowd was only the beginning. Tomorrow would bring the truth. Tomorrow would bring the reveal. And nothing in Daniel Reese's life would ever be the same again. The snow had stopped by the time the last fire engine pulled away, but the air still burned with the scent of smoke and melted rubber. The crowd lingered under the station lights, reluctant to leave, as if afraid that walking away would erase what they had just witnessed. People kept glancing toward Daniel, some with stunned gratitude, some with disbelief, some with the kind of awe usually reserved for headlines and heroes carved into bronze. But Daniel wasn't thinking about any of them. His knee throbbed mercilessly. His palms were torn raw, his lungs still scraped with every breath. All he cared about was the little boy now wrapped in a blanket clinging to his mother as paramedics checked him over. The mother looked at Daniel again and again, each time her face breaking into tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you," she said again, as if repetition might make the words adequate. He nodded once, unable to trust his voice. Around him, conversations buzzed in scattered circles. "That guard, he ran right in. Did you see how he carried the kid? I thought he was done for. Who is he?" And beneath all that noise, like a sour note in a hymn, came Barkley's voice, shaken, uncertain, but still trying to sound in control. This wasn't protocol. He shouldn't have. He could have endangered Rendell, shot him a look sharp enough to cut steel. "Shut up, Barkley." The crowd murmured in agreement. For the first time in his entire career, Daniel saw Rendell look small. But none of that mattered because the old man was approaching. He walked slowly, leaning heavier on his cane than he had an hour earlier, stepping with the careful precision of someone who had spent a lifetime balancing dignity on unsteady legs. "You shouldn't be standing," Daniel said, meeting him halfway. "Let's get you inside." You inhaled smoke. The old man raised one trembling hand. "I'm fine," he said. But his voice was different tonight, stronger, steadier, with something fierce glimmering underneath. He looked up at Daniel, the way a man might look at a long-lost answer to a question he had never dared to ask out loud. "You did more than save that child," he said quietly. "You showed me something I have been searching for." Daniel frowned. "Sir, who are you really?" The old man didn't reply. He simply turned, motioning for Daniel to follow him toward the far corner of the transit center, a quieter alcove near the closed ticket booth, where only the echo of sirens lingered. When they reached the bench, the old man lowered himself slowly, bracing one hand on the metal railing. He took a deep breath. "My name isn't the one you know," he began. "The one I gave you was simple. Convenient." Daniel blinked. "What do you mean?" The old man clasped his hands together, fingers intertwined tightly, as if holding something fragile between them. "I am Henry Bishop." The name hit Daniel like a cold wave, though he didn't understand why until half a second later, when recognition kicked in like a snapped wire. Bishop, as in Bishop Foundry, one of Ohio's oldest manufacturing giants, the company whose name was stamped on half the ironwork across the Midwest. Henry Bishop was a legend, a billionaire, a man whose portrait still hung in half a dozen civic buildings. And he had been sitting alone on a freezing bench for weeks, choosing anonymity over ivory towers. Daniel didn't speak. He wasn't sure he could. Henry studied him with tired eyes that seemed to reach straight through every wall Daniel had rebuilt over the years. "I walked away from the world 3 years ago," Henry said softly. "After my son died. After I lost the last of my family who cared about anything beyond money." Grief thickened his voice. "I came here because I wanted to disappear and see how people treated a man who looked like he had nothing left." Daniel sank onto the bench beside him, disbelief and understanding swirling inside a single breath. "And tonight, Henry said you walked into fire for a child who wasn't yours, with nothing to gain, with everything to lose. You did it without thinking, because that is who you are." Henry reached into his coat and pulled out a folded envelope. "I was going to give this to you next week," he said, "but after tonight, it can't wait." Daniel hesitated before taking it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, legal-looking, stamped notarized. At the top, last amendment to the estate of Henry T. Bishop. Daniel stared. "No," he whispered. This must be a mistake." Henry shook his head. "It's no mistake. I've watched you for weeks. Not just how you treated me, but how you treated everyone. The woman who dropped her groceries, the teenager who had a panic attack on the platform, even your co-workers who never gave you an ounce of respect." He inhaled shakily. "You have something my own board has forgotten. Something my heirs never understood." His gaze locked onto Daniel's. "Character." Daniel swallowed. "What exactly are you giving me?" Henry's next words seemed almost unreal. "The authority," he said quietly, "to take my place at the executive review next month, to challenge my board, to stop them from dismantling the company my father built." Daniel stared at him, stunned into silence. Henry continued. "They want to break Bishop Foundry apart, sell it in pieces, strip the pensions my workers rely on, turn it into something unrecognizable." He leaned closer. "I won't be alive much longer. The doctors have told me as much. But if I leave the company to them, thousands of families will lose their livelihoods." Daniel's pulse hammered. "But why me?" he whispered. Henry smiled, a soft, broken thing. "Because you remind me of the men who built this country with their hands and their hearts. You remind me of myself when I was young. And because tonight, in front of everyone, you proved beyond doubt that you carry something the company desperately needs." "What's that?" Henry touched his chest. "A moral center." Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. Emma's face flickered into his mind. Her drawings, her trust, her belief that her father was a hero even when he no longer felt like one. He opened his eyes again and found Henry watching him with quiet expectation. "You don't have to accept," Henry said, "but if you don't, there will be no one left to fight for the people who built my company. And everything I spent a lifetime creating will be sold to the highest bidder." Daniel exhaled slowly. In the distance, snowplows growled along the streets. Paramedic lights cast long blue shadows across the platform. A little boy, safe in his mother's arms, waved shyly at Daniel before being guided away. Barclay approached from the side, pale and stiff. "Reese," he muttered, I didn't know you had that kind of background. Your file didn't say anything about being trained for—" "I wasn't," Daniel said firmly. Barclay swallowed shame, reddening his cheeks. "I was wrong about you," he admitted. "We all were." People nearby nodded. Some apologized. Some avoided his gaze, entirely unable to face what their assumptions had cost. And in that moment, everything shifted. The balance of the room, the weight of their stares, the quiet sense that they finally understood who he truly was, or at least who he had always been. Henry touched Daniel's hand again. "Come to my office tomorrow," he said. "There's something I need to show you. Something that explains why you were meant to be here." Daniel folded the document slowly and looked back toward the platform, the wreckage, the smoke, the fading commotion. "Sir," he said softly, "I'm just a night guard." Henry smiled. "No, Daniel, you're the man who ran into fire when everyone else backed away. And tomorrow you're going to learn why fate put you on that platform, and why I chose you." Daniel felt the world tilt again, not with fear this time, but with the dizzying weight of possibility. His old life had collapsed tonight. His job was gone. His safety net was gone. His anonymity was gone. But something larger, something terrifying, something monumental had taken its place. "What happens next?" Daniel asked. Henry's eyes softened. "You decide," he whispered. "But whatever you choose, remember what you did here tonight. Because the world is about to see it." The platform lights flickered. The cold air bit deeper, and Daniel Reese realized he was standing at the edge of something far bigger than he had ever imagined. Something that would change not only his life, but everything connected to the name Bishop. And tomorrow, he would step into that truth, one way or another. The next morning felt strangely quiet, as if the whole city had taken a breath it wasn't ready to release. When Daniel arrived at the Bishop building, a towering block of stone and glass he'd passed 1,000 times, without imagining he'd ever set foot inside, the revolving doors parted as though expecting him. A security guard in a crisp uniform straightened the moment he approached. "Mr. Reese?" The man said, polite and almost reverent. "Mr. Bishop is waiting for you on the top floor." For a second, Daniel looked behind him, half expecting someone else to be there. But the guard meant him. The same guard who barely nodded at night shift workers now treated him like someone who mattered. When the elevator doors slid open on the 22nd floor, several executives were gathered near the conference room. Some lowered their eyes when they saw him. Others stepped forward with tentative respect. Barclay, who had followed Henry's summons out of obligation more than courage, approached last, shoulders rounded, clipboard nowhere in sight. "I was wrong about you," he said quietly. "If there's anything I can do to help fix what I broke, say the word." Daniel didn't answer right away. He had no desire to humiliate the man. Finally, he nodded once. Just learn from it. It was enough. Barclay's face softened with something like relief. Inside the conference room, Henry sat at the head of the table beside a spread of documents. He looked tired, but his eyes carried the same fierce clarity as the night before. "Have a seat, Daniel," he said. "There's much to go over." For the next 2 hours, the old man walked him through the company he had built, the betrayals he had survived, the values he had fought to preserve. He showed Daniel plans for a workers' initiative, a pension protection proposal, and a community fund he'd never trusted his board to manage. "I want you to oversee this," Henry said, tapping a folder labeled Community Advancement Trust. "Not because you know business, but because you understand people, because you won't cut corners on their backs." Daniel stared at the folder, unsure whether to feel honored or overwhelmed. "I'm just a guard," he said quietly. Henry smiled. "No, you're a man who runs toward fire when everyone else freezes." 3 days later, in a special session called by Henry himself, Daniel was introduced to the board not as a replacement, but as the appointed director of the new trust that would hold 10% of the company's annual profits. The applause was hesitant at first, then steady, genuine. The same people who once questioned his presence now listened to him outline an initiative that would support trade schools, protect retirees, and fund safety improvements for workers across the state. Even Rendell stood at the back of the room, hat in hand, offering a respectful nod afterward. But the moment that meant the most came later that evening, when Daniel knocked on the door of Emma's after-school center. A supervisor greeted him with a nervous smile. "We heard about what happened on the news," she said. "Your bravery. Well, the board decided to extend scholarships to students of first responders and civic heroes. Emma is covered for the rest of the year." Daniel blinked, emotion tightening his throat. "Thank you," he managed. When Emma came running into his arms, waving a new sketchbook the teachers had given her, he felt something in him settle. Something that had been unsettled for years. Months passed, and winter melted into a slow, wet Ohio spring. The transit station repaired the ramp, replaced the damaged buses, and even remodeled the waiting area. A plaque was installed quietly near Platform C, in gratitude to those who act without hesitation. Daniel didn't attend the unveiling. He was across town that day at a vocational school, shaking hands with the first round of students receiving grants from the new trust. Many were single parents, veterans, or laid-off factory workers starting over. When they thanked him, he always answered the same way, "Thank Henry. I'm just helping carry the torch." Henry and Daniel became unlikely companions. When Henry's health began to fail, they spent evenings in his apartment sharing quiet conversation over tea. Henry would ask about Emma's drawings, about Daniel's knee, about the little things he said he missed when his world had been made of boardrooms instead of people. One warm afternoon during their last conversation, Henry said, "I used to think legacy meant what we leave behind. Turns out it's who we lift up while we're still here." He passed away 3 days later. The service was small by his request. No lavish tribute, no corporate spectacle, just a simple gathering of workers, neighbors, and a handful of people whose lives he had touched in ways the public never saw. Daniel was asked to speak not as a director or representative, but as a friend. He told the story of a quiet man on a cold platform who needed a little help one night, and how that small, ordinary moment changed both their lives. A year later, the trust had grown into one of the most respected community programs in the region. Bishop Foundry stabilized under leadership grounded in values rather than ego. And Daniel, still limping slightly on bad weather days, now spent mornings making breakfast for Emma, afternoons at outreach meetings, and evenings walking home through a city that greeted him not with pity or dismissal, but with warmth. Sometimes he still visited the transit center. The bench where Henry once sat remained there, polished and unassuming. Daniel would sit for a few minutes, watching the ebb and flow of people who were too busy to see themselves as stories waiting to be discovered. One night, as he rose to leave, he noticed a man struggling to zip his coat hands, shaking frustration in his eyes. Daniel stepped closer. "Here," he said gently. "Let me give you a hand." The man looked up, startled, then grateful. "Thank you," he whispered. Daniel smiled. "Someone once helped me the same way." As he walked back toward the exit, he felt the simple truth settle over him like a warm coat. We never know when the smallest act of kindness becomes the turning point in someone's life, including our own. And sometimes the greatest legacy we can leave isn't written in documents or marble halls, but in the moments where we choose to see one another, even when the world isn't watching.